myth, and the legend, Mr. Scott Schultz. Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself and why your wines are so awesome.
Thanks for having me, guys. Good to see you both again, and everyone else as well. Um, I apologize about the background. I'm not as good as Adam with the fancy background that he's got, and I'm actually when Aaliyah and I were testing it out to make sure it would work earlier, we were hanging out down in the cellar, which is where I was hoping to be. The kids are still finishing up some work down there, and I was telling these guys we just found out we're getting some tanks delivered today that we thought were coming tomorrow. That we actually thought were coming a couple weeks ago. Kind of like Adam just said, everything is delayed, so it's gonna be kind of down to the wire because we've just moved into this new space. So like the crush equipment and all that stuff that's coming, we might be going. We're already pretty bare bones as far as what we need to ferment things and make wine, but yeah, with this new space, we had to buy a lot of equipment, and a lot of it's probably not going to be here on time because it's been real hot and dry here, and harvest is coming fast. We'll probably start picking things in the next 2 weeks or so.
Nice.
So, bit of a scramble. A little bit about myself. I'm guessing there's some people here that we didn't get to talk to last time, so I can do kind of the movie trailer version. Oh, great. Aaliyah just put the pictures up. So I'm one of two. You can see there's some pictures of Jenny in there as well. So it's Scott Schultz and Jenny Schultz. A lot of people for years like to say things like Scott's a one-man show, and he only makes 500 cases of wine and does it all by himself. That was true in the very beginning. It was myself, but then Jenny came along a few years later, and she's also a winemaker. She actually went to Davis. Like, I didn't go to Davis or any of that. I'm just pure experience. And she's been helping for years while holding down full-time jobs, making wine for other people. And then we just took her on, thank God, year and a half ago, full-time for us. So it's just the two of us. And then we've got some kids here helping us make some wines. I say kids, they're not kids, but colloquially say that. And these kids are great. They're actually going to make a little bit of wine this year too. So we brought them on full time to share between the three roommates. If anyone remembers last time, we used to have about 8 roommates, which was like Pax, Martha Stewart, Patrick Capiello, Carlo Mondavi were kind of the big ones, and then even some smaller ones at this new facility where Marine Layer, which sounds like Adam just brought into the shop, which are great Pinots and Chards, us, and then some other friends of ours called Sophie James that we've been making for the last bunch of years. So instead of being in 2 or even 3 different wineries, we've been able to consolidate that into one winery. So this year will be a first year working in a new space with some new people, but at the same time, it should make our lives a lot easier. And I quite literally moved 3 blocks away. So we moved our house as well. And I say it sort of jokingly, but I can pretty much get here before my seatbelt starts beeping at me.
Nice.
Which doesn't make sense. The question would be, why are you driving? It's because I have a truck. I need to drive sometimes. So, like I said, there is 2 of us. I've always worked in restaurants. I got to work in a lot of fancy restaurants where I was exposed to a lot of wines and got to drink a lot of wines way beyond my pay grade, and just really fell in love with it, and did both front and back of the house. Eventually kind of climbed up the wine director side of things and was moved out to California with one of the Thomas Keller restaurants. So I was the wine director at Bouchon. And just to kind of brush over it, Jenny, coming from a totally different world, she went to Villanova, got a chemistry degree, was making pharmaceuticals in Philadelphia, and someone gifted her a wine class, and she thought, oh, that's interesting. There's a lot of science in wine. So she went to Davis, got her master's degree, and then started working in wine that way. So I come from a lot of restaurant experience and more sort of hands-on wine knowledge, where she came from more technical wine knowledge both. So the 2 of us together are actually pretty great. I'm very left brain, artistic, and totally disheveled, and she's very, keeps everything together and very tight and very organized and has a memory like Rain Man. We've been making wine in the pack space for like the last 10 years. So this is our new venture. We've just moved up to the town of Healdsburg, which Aaliyah had on that map a little bit. So we're about an hour 20 north of San Francisco on the Sonoma County side. A little bit about the name, because we're a little bit confusing to some people because we have kind of a funny name. We make varieties that are sometimes a little new to some people, and make them a little bit differently or uniquely. So the name has nothing to do with us or our names. A lot of people assume that. If you were French, you'd say Jolie-Lade, almost like Led Zeppelin, but it tends to just get anglicized like so many other words to Jolie-Lade. Jolie is pretty, Lade is ugly. Colloquially, that sort of means like unconventionally attractive, kind of different but good. And the reference for that is purely the fact that just because it's Malone or Eligote and not Chardonnay or Gamay and not Pinot, doesn't mean they're any lesser or inferior. They're just different and they're still really pretty. So we work with, I don't want to say alternative varieties, but we don't, for ourselves, we don't make things like Sauvignon Blanc and Chard and Pinot and Cab. Those are done super well in California. And so since day one, we've just decided to sort of focus and champion the lesser known. So we do things, you're only going to see a few of them today, but we do things like Malone de Bourgogne, which is you'd see in the Loire. We do Gamay Noir, Trousseau Noir, Trousseau Gris. We did Claret Blanche and Fraise last year. Some more familiar things, like you're going to try Gamay, Grenache Syrah Mourvèdre. We do most of the Rhone varieties. So probably to the people who buy a lot of wine at Fermented, maybe none of those are too new or unfamiliar, but for some of the masses, they're a little lesser known. What else you want to know, Adam? We were just kind of floating just shy of about 5,000 cases of wine, and 18 was a big vintage. 19 was just weather-wise, unfortunately, really small. And then 2020, as most people know, there's a lot of fires. So a lot of people didn't get to make very much wine. We made about 60% of the wines that we usually make. We lost quite a few things to fires that we just couldn't pick. A lot of our things come in really early. And some of the areas we work with were not affected by fires, but a lot were. So even one of the wines you're going to try today, two of the wines actually, the Gamay, we only made about half of what we did. And the Shake Ridge that you're going to try, we didn't get to take that at all in 2020. But honestly, we feel very fortunate. We know a lot of people who quite literally did not make any wine.
Yep. I think, Scott, if you could touch just real briefly on kind of your winemaking philosophy and how it differs from mass-produced wines, native yeast fermentation, what you're doing in the vineyard, how you're really getting the complexity and the depth out of the wines that you're getting from the minimalistic approach, would be awesome as well.
Sure. And thank you for coaching me, because I will definitely skip a lot of stuff. So in 2007, when I moved here, I was working at the restaurant. And like I said, I was a wine buyer, and Bouchon is sort of a nucleus in Napa. A lot of people hang out there, especially at the time. It was the only place that stayed open quite late. So you'd have a lot of people in the industry hanging out. And I was like, wow, this is really fascinating. Everyone coming in is like, it's like Christian Mouex or the Schaefers or, winemakers, vintners, cellar masters, viticulturalists. So in 2007 harvest, I did what we do in restaurants. I staged. So I worked for free just to kind of check it out and learn and gain experience at a winery called Realm, and loved it. A lot of what's great about being in the cellar is very similar to being in kitchens. It's like fast and you're cleaning all the time. And I don't want to say hot, but it's just like nuts pandemonium, especially because everything we do, all the important stuff we do in a year is truncated down to like 3 months. So it's just insane. So they actually asked me to stay on. And of course I did. I didn't want to go back to the restaurants right then. And I adore restaurants. I miss them terribly, but just loved being in the cellar. We can crank music. We can drink beer if we want. So worked there for a couple of years as a cellar master. It was a great introduction to winemaking. It was relatively hands-off compared to what a lot of people do in Napa, but at the same time, they're big wines. They get tons of 100 points and they're highly regarded. And they just weren't wines that really spoke to me. I just grew up with a lot of European wines, working in restaurants. So that's kind of more what's saying to me. So all the things we did in Napa, it was like pick really ripe. And then there's a couple things you have to do if you're going to pick that ripe. You probably don't have much acid. So you have to water back and do big saignées, and water adds and acid adds. And we were 100% new oak. And so like I said, great introduction to qualitative winemaking. The wines they were making were really fantastic. But it just wasn't what was singing to me. So there was already a movement started of people in California, call it the Wing Gaps, the Duncan and Nathan from Hunter Roberts. I'm going to blank on his name right now, but Steve Edmonds from Edmond St. John, all these guys, Massican, Matthias, and they were all sort of starting to pave the way. And so I actually came in a really great time. Sorry if that's the forklift that you can hear. I switched over to the Sonoma County side to go work for Pax Maley over at Pax and Wind Gap. And Wind Gap at the time was making these really light, kind of irreverent, fun, high acid wines, and just thought that would be a really good fit. And PAX, as he had done with so many people before me. So underneath PAX is where Honor Robert started. It's where Rhyme started. It's where he let me start, and then Jamie Motley, and now even Emmy. So it's a bit of a continuum. So I worked for PAX and made wine underneath PAX for a whole bunch of years. So that's where we started this brand. I came in and PAX said, yeah, you're going to be an intern. You want to make a ton or two, go ahead. You know, I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't do what somebody else told me to do. If I just tried to use the more intuitive and see what would happen if I screwed it up or not, I guess is the truth. So PAX said, well, what if you could make anything, what would it be? And we were pouring his Trousseau Gris by the glass. And I said, oh man, I love that Trousseau Gris. It's such a unique variety. There's probably none. I understand that, you know, finite resource. And he's like, oh, dude, there's like 40 tons out there. At the time, it was just a totally overlooked variety. It was just being hucked into somebody's Chardonnay as white wine blender. And so we got to start with that for our very first year. It's the one we've been doing the longest. So in 2010, we made like 1 ton of Trousseau Gris and 1 ton of Grenache. The thing about the Wind Gap space and what became the PAX space is we're all of us, there's sort of a shared ethos. So even when we brought in roommates, you have to bring roommates, of course, that you can function together well in a kind of chaotic environment. We've all had roommates. We know it's like you got to pick your roommates really well. But also we had to pick roommates that were okay not inoculating, so we don't inoculate anything. We didn't have temperature control, so we didn't have glycol. So we just kind of use the indoor-outdoor temperatures when we need to heat or cool something. We would just kind of play that game, put it into the colder room if we needed cold, put it out in the sunshine if we needed hot. But no one inoculates. We do everything whole cluster. I can't speak for everyone in that facility, and certainly Marine Layer here will not be all whole cluster, but all of our reds, you know, we foot stomp Pinot Gris and Trousseau Gris, we foot stomp all the whites, we foot stomp all the reds and keep them whole cluster. Whole cluster brings kind of an herbaceous quality that we really like. So it's super lo-fi. I don't want to make it sound too easy because, you know, it is my job, but at the same time, like, we've sort of gotten away from it. And that was sort of the realization is, you know, everyone is in such a quest to control everything where, you know, you crush some grapes, they start to ferment all on their own. So they're going to ferment. It's just sort of keeping observant and paying attention and making sure that the fermentation is going in the direction that you want it to. I mean, obviously grapes want to turn themselves into vinegar. We don't want that to happen. But as long as you're pumping things over, punching them down, or doing cap management, or, you know, smelling ferments, tasting whites, just like making sure the temperatures go in the right direction and the bricks is going in the right direction. Yeah, you're good. Come on in. It actually is kind of easy, to be honest.
It's all about farming.
Farming, we work with almost exclusively organic. There's a few people that are converting. There's a couple people that are kind of in the biodynamic world, but some of that can get a little, I don't want to like disparage it at all, but, you know, some of the important preps, like using the Silex and some of the sprays and stuff, we love, but we don't have to do all of it. We've been able to convert a lot of growers. A lot of the sort of crusty old growers don't really believe in organics. It does cost more, of course, just like you see in any kind of farming. There's certain vineyards where it's usually the son or daughter, the next generation that's taking over. They're slightly more amenable. Usually and this has happened many times, including with the Gamay that you're going to try tonight, it's when we got them to plant it, it was not going to be organic. And we kind of said, all right, well, how much is it going to cost? Because they have to, if you're not spraying something like a fungicide, something to get rid of the weeds, then there's competition. And then if you're not going to spray it, then you have to go in and hand hoe or weed whack. And that's just another person and pass through the vineyard, which just gets expensive. So they kind of worked out the math. They're like, it would cost at least another $500 a ton. We're like, great, done. Let's do that. Let's just get the manpower out there, which is getting harder and harder, honestly. They're coming up with better and better tractors and things like that. Like I didn't think to bring a picture, but there's this new tractor called the Monarch out here, which is fully autonomous with just 1 million cameras, and it collects all this information while it's going down your rows. It's amazing. And as these things, like as these technologies start to come into play, it'll get a lot easier to farm organically with less manpower.
That's cool. Love technology. Let's get into some wines.
If
First up,
Adam, at the end of this, if I don't make people nauseous, we can certainly, it sounds like they're quiet out there now. I can certainly do like a quick loop to make some context out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those tanks might be coming in, so there might be some trucks here too, but that's all exciting.
Okay.
So
Yeah, let's take a tour after the wines.
Of course, yeah, you got the wines in front of you. So
Cool.
one of the things I neglected to mention, which is interesting, and you guys will kind of pick up on it if you don't know already, is in sort of our failed marketing is we do change our label art all the time. So we work with different artists every single year. The short history of that is one, I probably wanted to be an artist and never quite got there. So it's a little bit of a creative outlet for myself. But a lot of these things were born out of working in restaurants, especially restaurants in Napa, because I went through restaurants with big worldly wine lists. And then when I got to Napa, the myopia of people only drinking Cabernet, Pinot Noir, and Chardonnay was very real, which is totally fine. Those wines are great, but I just thought it was so strange that people only drank 2 or 3 different wines. And you guys are not in Texas, but I may have said this last time. We had a group over at Rome when I was working there, and a group of Texans came in, and I was like, all right, guys, we got 6 cabs, 1 cab Merlot blend, and then 1 Sauvignon Blanc, and they were like, what? No, we don't drink white wine. And I was like, geez, what do you guys drink by the pool when it's like 110 degrees? And they're like, Cabernet. So again, like to each their own. I think all of the wines of the world are great. I like people to drink what they like. At the same time, there's a lot of different foods. There's a lot of different flavors. So if you're not, trying to learn many of them, you're kind of missing out on some things. So that's why we do a lot of different varieties. The reason we change the labels is because when you drink a lot of European wines, people are very hyper cognizant of the vintage because the weather is very important to what the wine's going to taste like. We tend to stick with good producers, even in bad years. Like, 2015 was hot. So if you're drinking Malone and Burgonia in 2015, it's a bigger wine than you normally think you would drink. But in California, not a lot of people pay attention to vintage. And the big guys work really hard to make it the same every single year. So when you pick up a bottle of wine, it's always going to taste the same. And we're not big believers in that because the weather is different every year. Us as people are different every year. Fermentations go differently every year. So that's why we changed the packaging, because it's unique every single time. And we want people to, it might make it a little bit confusing when they're at the store looking for the wine they had last year, but it's constantly evolving and hopefully always getting better. So I just wanted to, if anyone didn't recognize the labels, that's why this year it's this woman from just north of Montreal named Claire. She's the artist for this series. And we've done, you won't see all of them today, but it's been myself, it's been friends. We did some tattoo artists. We did Team Element photographer, Brian Gaberman, who actually lives in Sebastopol. We worked with Creative Growth, which is an art center for artists with disabilities in Oakland. So it was actually 12 different artists from one art center that year. So it's all over the place, and it changes pretty dramatically year in to year out. So you'll see 3 examples in this slideshow. But if you were to type in Jolie-Lade wines and just hit images, you'll see a bunch of others. And we already have the artists lined up for next year, and it's going to be a big swing from this year. So this is Malone and Burgonia. If anyone doesn't know Malone, it's the variety when people often think that Muscadet is a variety. It's the region in the Loire on the coast where Muscadet is Muscadet, the place, but also Malone Burgonia. So as the name suggests, it actually migrated from Burgundy. Interesting variety. They're usually real light and crisp and clean because you're on the water. A lot of people call them shellfish wines. Super lemony and great with oysters and shellfish, that kind of stuff. This is in California. It happens often, but it was confused as Pinot Blanc for a long time. So a lot of material that Davis was selling, they thought was Pinot Blanc, and a lot of growers put it in, especially down in the Chalon area. This was put in by, what's his last name? David. He was kind of a legend in the viticulture business back then. I'm going to blank out his name for a moment, but it'll come to me. He actually died piloting a plane sort of like Dagenau. He was the first one to start importing barrels to like barrel ferment Chardonnay and that kind of stuff. So this area, there's a lot of granite and limestone. There's not a lot of limestone in California. And when you think of Burgundy, that is what makes Burgundy so special. And so these guys were chasing Burgundy. So they planted a bunch of Pinot Noir down here back in the day. And they also planted some whites, like what they thought was Pinot Blanc turned out to actually be Malone. So the original, sorry, Dick Graff was the guy I was trying to think of his name. The original Chalone vineyard, this is next to that, then Michaud, and then Brousseau are sort of all relatively contiguous. They're separate vineyards, but they're all on kind of one mountaintop at the base of Pinnacles National Park. So this is essentially an extinct volcano, which is why there's a lot of granite and limestone. Because of that, so these are really old vines. Well, really old vines. They're from '85. This is the one wine that we don't put in any barrels. So these go into the concrete eggs. So this is a great soil site. We pick it really early because of the soils, the acid wants to drop out, and we want to retain acid, and we don't want to have to add it out of a bag. So we actually pick this in the 18 to 19 range, bricks, I should say. So this usually has a finished alcohol of something like 10 to 11. Mm-hmm. It's prepped over 11, 11.2, things like that, but it's usually pretty low. A lot of wineries like to lie down. If their Chardonnay is actually 16.2, they'll write 15.5 on a label. This is one of the wines where we've choked the number up a little bit because 10.8 might scare some people. So we'll call it 11. So beautiful old vineyard, whole cluster pressed, like it says, into concrete eggs where it ferments. As soon as it stops fermentation, we top the eggs up and just seal them and get them cold and walk away. So this doesn't go into any barrels. It's only a 6-month. We do mention Surly on this only because people make that association because of Muscadet, but all of our wines sit on their relative gross lees. It does do some pairings in here, but this is meant, and you'll see it in, well, I guess you're not going through the whole lineup, but most of our wines, just so I don't say it on every single wine for you, we pick on the earlier side, and that can be a little bit confusing. When I say early, I mean by bricks level, because we like the alcohols to be down and we like upright acidity. Some of our vineyards are just really cold sites. So just because we mean early, I don't necessarily mean by date, but by bricks level, because some of those sites we're getting toward, the beginning, sometimes even middle of October, probably not this year. And then picking Syrah, but Syrah we're still picking only at like 22, 21 and a half. So we get to spend a lot of time on the vine generally, but just without a lot of sugar accumulation. So it just keeps the alcohol a little bit lower. All that being said, we just like wines that are bright and refreshing and sort of satiating. If I could afford it, I would just drink champagne all the time. I just love the nerve and acidity. So a lot of our wines have a lot of acidity, but we do build a little bit of texture into them. These for sure. If someone said, why is your wine have more texture than in Muscadet? It's because it's grown in the California sunshine and it ferments in the concrete eggs. Concrete is not unusual to California versus Muscadet, but at the same time, the texture of the California sunshine in those concrete eggs and also sitting on the lees, it's just a little more textural component.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome, man. Love this wine every single year. I think that you do an amazing job of highlighting the grape, but still making it distinct for the region.
Great. And there's obviously not much of it in California. The people who realized what they had, a lot of people did correct back to Pinot Blanc. Some of the old guys, they don't like that name, Malone de Bourgogne, because it sounds scary to them. So they still call it Pinot Blanc, even though they know these days we have DNA testing, so we can prove it.
Liars.
Unique.
Yeah, it's dynamite. And then tell us which wines real quick you release to Georgia in the spring versus which wines. Actually, I'm going to let you wait until we get to the last two wines to talk about that. Let's try the Pinot Gris first.
Perfect. So when I hinted at we make things a little bit differently, this is Pinot Gris. There's a couple different words that people like to throw out. Some people say orange wine. Some people say Ramato. What we do on Pinot Gris and on Trousseau Gris, if you ever have that wine, is we step on it just like we would red grapes. So they get picked into a bin. We jump in the bin. We step on it with our feet, and then we'll dump it into a tank. And the reason for that is Pinot Gris. You can think of all of the light and crisp versions of Pinot Gris, but they're often pretty forgettable. And we'd like to add a little pre-fermentative skin contact to just add some kind of visceral mouthfeel and texture. It sort of picks up phenolics, but without grabbing, because it's not fermenting, it's essentially just sugar and water. And there's no heat and there's no alcohol, which are soluble. So if we were going to ferment on the skins, we would grab a lot of tannin. So we're kind of dipping our toes into that world, but without ever going full bore, because we drink the the Grabners and the Radicons and all the famous skin fermented wines, and they're super interesting. At the same time, like I said, I like satiating, and I want you to be able to house a whole bottle if you want to at the pool. Um, a lot of the orange wines are so textural that you tend to want them to always be balanced with food, and they end up on a tasting menu and you only drink this much of it. And again, very cerebral and interesting, but we like a little bit of texture, but then still really spry. So that's why it's only a couple of days. Color's kind of a happy accident. You can see it picks up kind of a light peachy hue. That's the, if anyone doesn't know that, Pinot Gris, that gris part just means it's gray. So the fruit actually does turn purple. It looks like Pinot Noir when you pick it. If we were just to throw it in the press, the color is so unstable, it'll come out clear. But with that little bit of skin contact, it comes out just slightly peachy. This is a cool old vineyard. Like it says, the Sonoma Land Trust. This is, if anyone knows the area, it's down in Glen Ellen, which is Sonoma Valley, which is kind of famous for the old Italian guys who used to come up. So this has been a vineyard for a really long time. There's a famous old house next to it. But what happens is it's a little bit of a colder site, and it runs down the hillside. And if you know how the cold air works, the cold air runs down a hill and settles at the bottom. And it's too cold for cab, because cab's a late ripener. So essentially they butted out half the hillside, the lower portion, to Pinot Gris, because it's an earlier ripener. So it was a way of them using this cold part of the vineyard. So they lost out on some cab, but they put in a better variety for the spot. We've been working with Pinot Gris for almost since the beginning. And with a little bit of skin contact, we just think it gets so much more interesting. It lifts aromatics a bunch. It changes the wine so dynamically. Whereas if we were just to press it and stainless tank ferment it, it would just be a little more boring. Where a lot of domestic Pinot Gris has like that circus peanut candy flavor to me, and this like brings out a lot of the minerality and the stoniness. And we do ferment in kind of a combination of things. There is some stainless. It does go into puncheons for fermentation as well, which is just the larger barrels, which also adds a bit of a roundness to the mouth. And then it goes into all neutral barrique for just 6 months. So we do use a lot of barrels. Most of our barrels are very old. As long as we can get them to keep holding water, we keep putting wine in them over and over. It works. We have a steamer, which works sort of as like an autoclave, but it helps us fix any barrels that are starting to dry out. We are in an area, both in Sebastopol and here in Healdsburg, where there's a lot of really fancy wineries around us. So those guys like to use a lot of new wood, which is great. There's almost nothing sexier than opening up a brand new barrel. It's like a new piece of furniture. It smells so good. We just don't want that to impart that into the wines. We want the wines to taste like the place that they come from. So when they're done using those new barrels 2 or 3 times and they don't taste like wood anymore, that's when we buy them from them. A new barrel's $1,000 to $1,200, depending on the euro. For us, we buy used barrels for $25, $35, $45. So that also kind of plays with our price points. We don't put the fancy new oak on it. We just use fancy used barrels because they add a lot of texture. They're very aerobic, but they just don't add the oaky flavor.
Man, this is good every single year, and a little bit different every single year. Scott mentioned the Trousseau Gris earlier, the longest wine that he's made. We do get that from time to time as well. We don't currently have any in stock, but we did get a little bit this year. And I want to, what's that?
There is going to be some coming.
Okay, cool. I want to mention real quick, most people don't think about aging whites, rosés, and orange wine, but Scott's wines can age a really, really long time, no matter the color, whether it's red, whether it's white, whether it's orange, because the balance of the acid, the fruit, the tannin, and the reds, everything's so well balanced, and it's so well made that these are wines that you can sit on and will get better in 3 to 5 years. Every single one of them will be better in 3 to 5 years, in my opinion. Scott, what do you think about that? Do you agree?
You said it perfectly, because of the many, there's a couple different things in our wines that do help them age. Acidity is most certainly one of them. When you get to things like whole cluster Syrah, where there's both acidity and a grandiose amount of tannin, 2 of the main things that you need to, when you think of the old Bordeaux's, Those age remarkably well. I tend to be buying, I'm not great at holding on to wines for very long. I buy and consume.
Me either.
I do like to see the evolution. We have a little bit held back of every single wine that we've made, just so we can check in on them every once in a while. And we've had, we had the very first vintage, 2010 Trousseau Gris, not that long ago at a friend's wedding. And I saw it come out of the cellar and I was like, oh shit, this is going to be terrible. And it was stored immaculately and the wine was perfect.
Awesome.
That is never something you can count on, be it the cork, be it, the cellar temperature, be it how many times it's been moved, all those things, but they tend to do pretty well. I always wish we could be on a slower turn. So for like this Pinot Gris, for example, we ferment this, age it for 6 months in barrels, go straight to bottle, and then in the course of 2 months, we're already releasing it. But what happens in our world, in your world too, as a consumer, is we then have to get into getting wine sales shipped before the heat of the summer. So I wish we could wait 3 months more, or 5 months more. I always think wines do a little bit better with some time. So even if you do buy it young, Adam is totally right. Sit on it. Even if it's for a couple of months, the wines do always evolve. That's just the nature of the business and the cycle that we're on. Our reds, we have a little more luxury, is because we will bottle those in 11 months generally to flip over the cellar. But then we will personally sit on all those bottles at the warehouse for another 14 months to release them the following fall. So those wines are, even though they're still young and tannic, they've been kind of evolving in the bottle for a little bit longer. But yeah, so Adam, you did ask, in the spring, are the spring-like things you'd want to drink in those warm months? Malone, Pinot Gris. We do a rosé out of Gamay as well.
When's that coming to Georgia?
That already came. That was in the spring
What?
this year.
Oh, I'm pissed. I gotta call Carson.
Call that was a good one.
Yeah.
So, like I mentioned, 2020 was rough. We didn't get to make as much wine as normal. It was pretty brutal out here. In fact, I didn't want to bore anyone with the story, but we had another facility we were working on in Santa Rosa, which was a lower house and winery, and it had an upper bunker that we had turned into a winery, and the glass fire knocked out the lower house and winery. So we didn't lose any barrels. The bunker that we were in, the fire went quite literally right over it, like melted the solar panels on the ceiling, but the lower house and winery got totally smoked. So Jamie Motley, who we adore, who I've been making wine with for a long time, she lost all of her 2019 barrels. So yeah, it was a challenging year for sure. California, we love it here so much, but you definitely take a beating sometimes. So this is an interesting year, 2020, because it's been so hot and dry. We're hopeful that fires can keep at bay enough this year. But we're seeing funny things. It's a smaller crop, shorter shoots, just less energy in the vines because it's not moving much water. The water table is depleted because there hasn't been any rain. So what we will get is a lighter crop with more concentration, but just not as much fruit. So we're expecting to be down for 21 as well.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is we need to tell Carson now that we want first dibs on the 2021 stuff, just to make sure.
You definitely should. We are trying to, and this is boring stuff for all of your friends listening, but we opened up several new states last year for distributor partners, and we weren't even able to. So we pay for the licensing, we create the dialogue, all this stuff, and then 2020 happened, and we had to turn around and say, I'm sorry, there's just no wine. So the fall release is going to be pretty dainty, and then we're hoping to really lean in this year for harvest and crank out as much as we could possibly fit through this place.
So what Scott's saying is, come get the wines now while we have them.
Well said.
Because they won't be around forever, and they never are. And I'm going to try to find out how we can get some of that Gamay Rosé.
That was the first year we made rosé out of it. Yeah, go ahead. What do you need? This. We were using an old variety called Valdegui for years from the 1940s up in Ukiah, and we really liked it. But this might be sort of placebo, but there's a texture in that wine that we think comes from, it's really virused, which some people don't mind. Virus can be problematic. One of the benefits we had with it is that vineyard would get to about 18 or no, maybe more like 19 bricks. and then it would stop its ability to ripen anymore. It just didn't have any sap flow or movement through the xylem and phloem. So you'd like go out and check, and you're like, okay, it's 18, and then you'd get to 100 degrees, and you'd freak out and go out and check. I'm like, geez, it's still at 18, and then the leaves would turn bright red, and they would just stop photosynthesis. But there was a flavor in that wine that we think came from the virus. So as we've been working to get more and more Gamay in the foothills, we were able to start making rosé out of that. And just for our style, we think it's an even better wine. So it's just, it has a ton of acid. The malic was really high on it. And it's just like very fruity and totally, totally crushable.
Nice.
This is the red version of that. All you guys know, Gamay, it was ostracized from Burgundy years ago, considered inferior. So it's sort of that same story we were talking about earlier. It's not lesser. It's just as good. It's just different. Beaujolais tends to have a inferiority complex because of it. So there's a lot of Beaujolais producers that try to make very fun, irreverent, fruity, kind of carbonic red wines that are like delicious to get kind of cold and drink in the summer. And then there's the guys who want to make very, very serious, kind of stoic Gamays that taste like Burgundy. Ours is definitely in the lighter, fruitier, more irreverent style because we just think it's really fun to drink. So this grower, so Steve Edmonds, who makes Edmund St. John, he took this grower. His name is Ron Mansfield. He's kind of famous around here. He has a company called Gold Bud. So he's been farming out in the foothills since the 70s. He grows everything. Stone fruit, like everything, but they work with a lot of vineyards. And so they went to Beaujolais, the northern half. This is a very similar soil series because it's this pink granitic soils. And he was like, look at the ground. This is what you have in California. We should be planting Gamay in California, especially at high elevation like this. This is about 3,200 feet. So it stays much cooler because you're getting up into the foothills on your way to like Lake Tahoe. So they brought material back, and they got material from Davis, and Steve Edmonds had it for years. And I begged him for some, and he was like, no chance. Like, I'm the one who did all the legwork. Like, I get it all. So we just spent years working with the grower. So what we do is every year when we prune, we cut all the pruning material, and then we take that and store it for a couple of months. And then we come in and we take all the buds out of the sticks and bud those into other vines. So a lot of these were like, one was a Merlot vineyard, one was a Pinot Gris vineyard, and we've budded it all over to Gamay. So we still actually have even more coming online. So we went from, it took me like 4 years to even get 1 ton of Gamay.
Wow.
And now we'll probably get something like 20 to 30 tons of Gamay this year, both split between rosé and red wine. So It's a really slow process. And there's a thing here. It's sort of like the Craigslist of the wine world called winebusiness.com. And you can like go find Chardonnay, and you can go look for tanks, and you can go look for Pinot Noir and whatever. Varieties like this would never be on that because you kind of need to find a grower who's squirrely enough to let you talk them into putting in things like Gamay. And these guys were very malleable and were ready to do it. So they have a bunch of fun varieties up there. We have another vineyard around the corner from here that you guys are going to hear all about it because Sam from Idlewild is kind of who's spearheading it. But we've literally just budded in almost 60 different varieties.
Is that Fox Hill?
It's not Fox Hill. Fox Hill is up in Ukiah as well.
Oh, okay.
A new one. We call it Sweetwater, but it's kind of Coda. It's a guy who bought a huge property and sort of gave Sam carte blanche to bring in all of his community. And then we all kind of said, what would you do? What would you do? And just threw out a bunch of varieties and then kind of figured out the best place to put them all. So it's a super rare, because where we live, the ground is just too valuable that nobody generally would play with anything other than Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir, you can get $5,000 or $6,000 or even $7,000 a ton for. Where Gamay, something like this, is $3,000 a ton. So essentially, you split your cost of the fruit in half. But we can hang more Gamay, so we can shift that math a little bit. Instead of going down to 2 tons per acre, we can hang 4 or 5. So it makes the grower a little more open to playing with fun varieties. This, to get to the boring part, so this is Gamay. Like I said, pink granite, 3,200 feet, picked early. We don't step on this. It does say whole cluster and carbonic, so we started carbonically, and then finish in whole cluster. So for the people who already know what that means, I'm sorry to bore you with it. People who don't know, essentially it comes in whole. If it was like a regular red wine, we would crush the grapes and dump it into a tank. This is a little bit different. So we put the put the grapes in a tank whole. We'll pump in something that we call a pied de cuve. It's just like a little bit of a starter. So it's something else that's fermenting just because we need to create CO2. So we'll seal it. There's CO2 being created in there, and we'll let that ride for something like 6, 7, 8 days. So what's forcing that to happen is all the berries are fermenting on the inside enzymatically, not yeast-based. And when we think of like Beaujolais Nouveau and you get that really bright strawberry banana flavor, that's the enzymatic fermentation. So that's what we're pushing for here. Then we take the lid off, and it looks totally anemic because it hasn't been crushed. Then we'll step on it, and it's usually about halfway fermented carbonically. And then once we step on it, it has so much mass and just momentum that it goes dry really fast. So the hope is always the best of both worlds. It's some carbonic for really bright, effusive aromatics, and then some whole cluster for a little bit of texture, but it's a short amount of time on the skins. So we get the big aromatics, but we keep tannin really low. So we can age it a short amount of time and still have like a really delicious, chuggable red wine for the backyard.
And it is delicious and chuggable. Put a little chill on this. It is awesome, awesome, awesome. We've done this a couple times against Beaujolais, and yours always wins.
I doubt that, but I'm glad people are liking it.
No, it's true. We've got some people that have been buying this specific wine by the case, multiple cases at a time. Like, it's beloved. And then of course it's like so pretty too with that Kate Scott photography art on it, which is such a nice bonus.
You guys know, and we work really hard to match the art to the labels. There's a sort of a transcendence that we think happens. And I'm sure most people, it's totally over their head, but when you're sitting in front of it and you pour that wine and the wine is literally the same color as that, you know, the artwork on the front, there's just like this whole dynamic that happens. And we just love the thought of that happening in restaurants, especially when you're pouring Pinot Gris or Trousseau Gris and the color comes out of a dark bottle and it's a different color than you expect. And there's so much happening. And again, most people probably don't have that same relationship, but we build it for that. And if anyone ever picks up on it, like you kind of just did, Aaliyah, then that's a win for us.
That's what, well, so my degree's in art history. So the first time I saw your bottles, I was like, love affair. We're doing great wines and it looks cute too. But so it's true. I had a sing song moment about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We needed that sing song moment. Anytime wine makes you break into song, that's a good day.
Yeah.
That's why we do what we do. Yeah, right. It's so good. So good.
So Shake Ridge, this is like I said, we do something like 14 different wines. This is a vineyard out it's called Amador County. So this is not quite as far and high as the wine that you just had prior. So it's the next county over. We love it out here. This is Ann Kramer. Where would that be on your map? Yep, somewhere out there.
I'm looking. Yep.
Kind of on your way out to Yosemite almost a little bit. So really cool soils. She has something like 40 acres, just totally undulating, a mix of different terroirs all over the place. She's definitely renowned as one of the just best, but also just like most interesting, knowledgeable growers around. She's worked in Napa for years. She worked in South America. She and her sisters bought a property out there. It started a little bit smaller, but then they took on the neighboring property. So they got it up to about 40 acres. And it's mostly Rhone varieties, but they have other things like Tempranillo and some fun whites out there. So when we wanted to go to Shake Ridge, we wanted it to be more of a vineyard snapshot than a monovarietal bottling. So we didn't want to do just Grenache or just Syrah. Like if you've had a lot of our friends make wine out there, Ferdinand makes a Tempranillo, Enfield makes a Tempranillo, Dirty and Rowdy makes a straight Mourvèdre, Barbara, Angela from Tribute to Grace makes a straight Grenache. And they're all super interesting, but we wanted to do more of a snapshot of the place. So that's why this is Grenache Syrah Mourvedre, but with a co-ferment of a little bit of Viognier in it as well. As you guys all know, Viognier is often co-fermented in the Northern Rhone. Sometimes that's even more of a sugar add. They say there's a co-pigmentation that happens, so it's sort of a color stability. For me, all it really is this sort of snaky, beautiful perfume that kind of happens in the background. So we elected to put that in as well. So a little bit different of a blend. So this is all co-fermented. We don't make them all individually and then kind of say, ooh, 2% of this and 1% of that. So the blending is done pre-harvest. So when we pick where we're going to be in the vineyard, and we're trying to pick places that ripen relatively, the same. None of them are ever exactly the same. Grenache tends to shoot way farther ahead. It likes the sun. Syrah is always well behind that. And then even flavor-wise, like Grenache is super red fruited when you don't push the ripeness too high, when it starts to get kind of porty. But Grenache is very pretty and red and strawberry. Syrah, of course, is super brambly and spicy and gamey. Mourvedre's like super blue, and then Viognier is just like crazy perfumed. So it's these things kind of together coalescing in unison is the hope. We've made changes to the blend every year, but we make the wine, we bottle the wine, we sit down with Anne, we do a lot of these big tastings out in the vineyard. And we're like, what would we change? Would we bump the Mourvedre down a little bit? We bump the Viognier up a little bit. We just think it's really unique and like lifts the aromatics. So the blend is never exactly the same. Like I said, we did not get to make this in 20, and we'll see what happens in 2021. But the fires in different places in California just got so bad that if we would have brought it in, if anyone knows anything about smoke taint, you kind of can't really get around it. If you're near a fire, if you're far away, it's generally no problem just to see some smoke in the air. But it's sort of, we found, after now working through a couple different years, like 2008, 2017, 2019, and 20, if you're near a fire, that epiderm, that sticky substance that's on the outside of the grapes, that smoke sticks to it, and there's no way to get it off. And when you ferment it, it essentially frees itself, and you end up with a wine that smells like an ashtray. And there's just nothing you can do to prevent it. So we just kind of had to lean into insurance and decline the fruit. And so they get paid their farming costs, but it's an overall loss. So it's never something you want to do, but trying to make wine out of it and then turn around and sell it to other people, it just isn't what we can do either. So it's a really special place. Anna's amazing. This is all foot stomped in whole cluster. So there is no carbonic in this. Just gets picked into the bins. We jump in, take our shoes off, sanitize our feet, step on all the grapes, rotate it to, this year it happens to be in these two big concrete tanks. We generally punch it down and pump it over. You guys know how fermentation works. Wait a couple days, it starts to ferment. We give it some air, beat it up a little bit. It goes dry on the skins, and then we put it into neutral barrels for just over a year.
Adam, you're on mute. This is another one I would want to see like 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, it's so beautiful. And obviously it's got that tannic structure that this will last. And I'm excited. I've actually got this one in my wine fridge. So now it becomes a game of how long can Aaliyah wait?
Yes. Be patient, Aaliyah. Be patient.
I'll do my best.
Because
Aaliyah, you say acid and tannin are two things we're definitely not afraid of.
Yeah. Because
of the nature of them. They're sort of a skeleton to certain wines. Mm-hmm. And it's just like food. If your food's missing salt or missing acid or missing, things are bland. And so acid and tannin are like the skeleton for us, are two things we really like to have a lot of presence. Mm-hmm. If anything is ever too much, if there's too much acid or too much alcohol or too much tannin, then it's not balanced. But again, those are things we're not really afraid of. And when you taste a whole cluster Syrah, a whole cluster GSM out of barrel, it's viciously tannic. But then even when we get to bottling about a year later, it's still pretty tannic. And then once we sit on it for, 6 of the 12 months or 14 months that we're sitting on those bottles, we'll check in on a couple. And it usually takes the 6-month mark generally is where they start to soften. We're like, oh, okay. By the time we actually release this wine, it'll be in a pretty good place, but we'll definitely only get better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I tasted this 6 months ago, and it's drinking even better now than it was 6 months ago. It's really, the complexity and the depth just continues to increase with age, and it's really cool and really beautiful. I love this style of Syrah, Grenache and Mourvedre together. Well done, as always. I haven't had a dog from you yet, Scott. So
I'll
keep
get
up
you.
the great work. No, you won't. No, you won't. What? So I got to ask before we get to our next. Actually, no, I'm not going to ask before we get to our next slide because I don't want to bias people. If you are going to take us on a vineyard, or not a vineyard tour, a cellar tour, I think now would be a great time while people are trying to decide their favorite wine of the lineup. And you cannot choose all of them. I know I want to as well, but you cannot choose all of them. You must pick a favorite.
And while you're doing that, a lot of people, when they come and taste, they do this thing. They're like, I mean, that one wasn't my favorite, or this one was, and they feel bad about it. And it's like, that's not the case at all. Like, you should never feel bad about it, because that's the beauty of us all being individuals, is individuality, and us liking different things. If we all like the same thing all the time, then that would certainly be pretty boring. So I think just, go with your gut. And if you didn't like some of those wines, then great. You know exactly what you like, and you know how to find that. And you have, people like Adam here to help you find that at the shop, which is kind of the best thing about having a local shop to go into, because they're like, hey, I know you like this. Have you ever had this? And you're like, holy shit, no, I haven't. I've never even heard of it. So big supporters of the local wine shop.
Thank you.
I will try not to make you guys nauseous. I'm just going to pick up my computer. It sounds like the forklift's humming, so I'm guessing that these new tanks are starting to arrive. So I should tell you, this the space that we just took over with Marine Layer, this is the former Ramey space. Ramey has two places. They have a white facility and a red facility. The red facility, they make a hell of a lot more Chardonnay than they do red wine, so they've consolidated into the white. So we've just taken over the red space. It's been Ramey for almost 20 years. And before that, it was Clos de Bois. It was a Clos de Bois tank farm. So we're kind of making it our own. So I'm going to turn this around. We're going to kind of an overview from the catwalk upstairs.
Nice.
The big warehouse.
I think this is officially our first winery tour.
Winery tour
On Zoom.
We're a bike gang, so we bought bikes for everyone in the cellar.
Oh,
That's
that's so awesome.
So we're quite literally in town, which is kind of a trip. So I'm walking out into the parking lot, and so it's a 3-block walk to downtown Healdsburg. So as you can see, we're literally just, and it's been a winery forever. So these guys are bringing in some of the new tanks that we're just getting delivered.
Nice.
We just stole those two kids from Costa Brown. We used to be next door to Costa Brown.
Good job. Good job.
So this infrastructure, for anyone who knows anything about wine, Ramey was mostly cab, and cab is a pretty hardy variety. So they would destem it all and must pump it into these tops, which are called closed tops. So this doesn't really work for us because we don't destem anything, and we also wouldn't put fragile varieties like Pinot Noir or Gamay through a must pump, especially because we just step on everything. So some of these tanks are going to go away. Some of these are great for big lots of like Sauvignon Blanc and Rosé. We're getting 18 open top tanks, which are going to live here shortly. That's a press. So these tanks are brand new. This guy who builds these are amazing. So it has this real big manway up top.
Mm-hmm.
So we can lift these lids. It's almost like a trunk on your car, and we can still rotate into them. These are just little 3-tonners. We're going to get 4-tonners and 6-tonners. And then other than that, like I said, I turned the chillers off so you guys could hear, but it's a couple of concrete eggs. It's punch-ins, just a bunch of barrels. And that's it, warehouse space.
Beautiful.
That's awesome. We had a question if you're going to be able to host tastings in the new location.
We probably will do a little bit of that, but it's more industrial, as you can tell. So we have some really good friends, Sam from Idlewilds and Evan from Ruth Lewandowski, who have a place right here in town, so just 4 blocks away. We're taking over the space next to them to share in a sort of a mercantile. Cool artwork and music and some wine stuff. But we're actually going to host some tastings in the shared space, which is behind Idlewild. So that'll probably start maybe September, maybe October.
Nice.
All right.
That's
So
exciting.
We need to plan a trip out to see you guys, because you're all our favorite peoples.
And that would be fun. And that, of course, we would do at the winery. But we say no to tastings so often, especially during harvest. But it's just Jenny. And so if someone's coming to town and they want to come taste, we have to be in town. And it's, we certainly don't mind sacrificing our weekend. We're always so thankful that people actually want to come taste the wines. So we do say yes quite often, but it's just we don't have the bandwidth to do it all. So we were kind of looking for a space all of our own. And then once that kind of happened and we can do it collectively, it was like, great, yes, please. So you'd be able to taste all 3 of the wines, not together, but individually, but in the same area.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. I love it. All right, Aaliyah, do you have a update? Oh, actually, we need Scott's favorite, and I need to give you my favorite. Scott, what's your favorite wine right now between these 4, just to drink personally?
To drink personally, between those 4, believe it or not, I would probably say I'm always surprised, but Pinot Gris ends up being one of our favorite wines every year. And I think I'm just always surprised because I don't expect that out of Pinot Gris.
Yep.
And we've used a couple different vineyards. We used to work with Windsor Oaks. We worked with Rourke for a long time. And his is probably the best. But every year I'm just like, holy shit, that is good. Right now I really like the Malone. It's 95 degrees here today. So I would be drinking one of the whites. Jenny is vegetarian, so we don't drink a ton of red wine. Not that you need to drink, red wine with meat or whatever the rules are. It's I just like everything I've said in the beginning, like bright, high acid, refreshing, cold. I'm the guy who gets wine way too cold, but it just feels so good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd probably drink a Malone or Pinot Gris, but of that lineup, Pinot Gris, but Gamay is something that I definitely have a big heart for as well. So
yeah,
can't lose.
And that is my vote, is the Gamay. So what do we got, Aaliyah?
All right. Well, close to everybody. It's actually really close, but the Gamay ended up being our winner this evening.
Awesome.
Good to hear.
Yep. And we've got a little bit more at the shop. We've got a little bit more than a case of all of these available right now. So again,
and we do have this single variety Syrah as well.
Absolutely, we do have the Syrah available as well, which is amazing. Think of the GSMV with even just a little bit more depth, complexity, just a little bit more weight. 100% Syrah. It's really, really awesome. Single vineyard.
It's amazing.
It is amazing. It is amazing.
It's
Scott, any parting words for us?
No, when Aaliyah was saying earlier that the Gamay often is so popular, yes, where it happens the most often is Gamay, and then the Syrah that you're speaking of right now. It ends up, and I don't do it, but people send me pictures. It gets thrown into blind tastings, and the bag comes off, and oh no, you must have mixed up the decanters. There's no way. There's no way. It tastes like it's from the Northern Rhone. It's just, it's a crazy area out there. It's super rocky, high elevation. We're above the fog line. So you get these really intense flavors. So yes, if people are Northern Rhone style Syrah drinkers, then that's the one for you. If that is not your style, then stay away from it, because it's definitely black olive, game, violet, graphite, like all the things we adore about Syrah.
Yep.
But again, to each their own. It's all individual.
There's no blueberry pie in your Syrah.
No.
If you guys are used to Aussie Shiraz or any really big California Syrahs, it's not going to be anything like that. It doesn't have that sweetness. It doesn't have the blueberry. It's got really great depth, as he said. Black olives, a little gaminess, and it is awesome. So we've got a little bit of that left as well. Scott, thank you so much again for closing us out and starting us off on our Zoom series. We so appreciate your time, your dedication, your passion. You can hear it in your voice. You can taste it in the wines. So thank you for being true to what you do, what wine is, the history, the beauty, the agriculture, all of it. Thank you for taking risks every year and giving us a product that is so delicious.
My pleasure. Believe me, it shocks me to fast forward, because even when I was living in Chicago, which is where I'm from, if you would have told me, 10 years, 12 years from now, you'll be in California and have a wine brand and be making wine, and I definitely would have thought you were crazy. And this has been such a slow, organic process. And I didn't say it earlier, but I had never even grown a houseplant in Chicago, so I didn't know how to grow anything.
Yep.
So I went to the Santa Rosa and the Napa JC to learn how the physiology works and how plants operate, and so it's been a lot of education, and I certainly learned more from all the growers we work with. We do get to make some calls out in vineyards and decide when we water and how we leaf and which side and all that kind of stuff. But we work with a lot of great growers, so it makes me look a lot smarter than I am.
What it's all about, man. Working with great people, great grapes, great vineyard sites, and being passionate and honest with winemaking.
What, Aaliyah, was there any questions before we kick me off here?
I think the only last question is if you're a musician.
No, I adore music, and we haven't quite set up our Sonos here yet, which, being in a place like this without music, like, oh man, this silence is painful. We just have some little speakers that we're playing right now, but we're all big music fans, so we're gonna get that set up, and it's gonna be pretty loud in here soon.
That's awesome. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being here on our very last Zoom tasting, at least for the time being. Again, we're going to try to figure out some kind of hybrid tasting so we can still have winemakers show up on the big screen at the Flight Club. But we're going to need a little bit of time to figure that out. It's a little bit harder than I first thought. Stay tuned for Flight Club opening up next week. We're going to take the month of August off. So just come in and get flights, hang out at the store with us. Kids go back to school next week for most of you, if you have kids. So congratulations, grab some champagne, celebrate that day. And for the rest of you, we will see you soon. Come grab the wines. Scott, have an amazing night. We can't wait to see you out there, and we can't wait till you come out here at some point now that COVID is hopefully going away and we can all get back to what we're doing. I know I don't know what the hell is going on these days, but
I got some family up there, man. I'm coming.
There you go. Love it. So let us know when you're going to be here. We'll have you in the shop and you can all meet him firsthand. And everybody have an amazing night. Thanks, Scott.
Adam, I love the Flight Club name.
Thank you. You'll have to come out and check it out.
Oh, I will. Thanks, awesome. Everyone, for coming.
Thanks, guys.
Everyone. Thank you, Scott.